So, welcome back, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and to be willing to talk with us today. Um, we talked about many things in all this interview, and especially we talked about higher self and self. And I think it will be interesting to focus also on what's in between, starting from first density to sixth density. Um, can you give us a quick resume, if I may say that, on the main attributes of each density?
Okay. Well,
Hmm.
um, this is, of course, a very big question, and I'm not a fully enlightened Buddha, so I can't say everything about everything.
Yeah,
So my awareness is limited and my understanding is limited. But I'll do my best and give a brief overview of the dimensions 1 through 6.
thank you.
uh, as they relate to states of consciousness and development of awareness and realms and beings and conditions, things like that. So basically, we can understand life in in the first six densities, 6 of 7, meaning six of the octave of associated with the solar system. Each solar system being seven-dimensional, like the seven colors of the rainbow. So those seven colors correlate perfectly in Ra's system and in the esoteric Hindu or yoga system with seven states of awareness or consciousness. Uh, the first is normally considered elemental and or mineral. Elemental is not yet even visible or physical. So a mineral would be the first dimension of visible physical life. Before that, you have what's called elemental, and it's very esoteric, but they're not yet actually physicalized yet. And so Ra said that air and fire teach earth and water. And so you've got a lower and a higher. And this kind of division between lower and higher um, basically begins the understanding of outer plane and inner substantial cause. That kind of duality that we see in third density with a physical and a non-physical, and that goes up through sixth density, I believe, although it ends in six. And so Ra talks about time, space, and space-time. Space-time being the term used for physical third density, time-space the term for non-physical third density, where space-time is an emphasis, the emphasis of um, awareness or consciousness is on spatial relations, where Ross said we're relatively fixed in space, or relatively fixed in time, but free in space, meaning we can move around through what appears to be physical space, while we experience a kind of fixity in linear awareness of time. So we think we're in a present moment that is separate from a past or a future. So when we talk about third density, I'll explain that a little more. So first density, if we say elemental, it's basically what creates minerals. What creates minerals? Well, something like the forces of air and fire forming and shaping and quickening and causing to manifest earth and water. And so that's what is happening that forms minerals. It's some kind of increased motion, which is air, and combustion, combination, uh, again, a quickening fire that applies to earth, the elements of earth and water, which is solidity and then some the capacity for mobility or coalescence with flow. So air is a flow without coalescence, meaning that there's it appears to be invisible. It's really electromagnetic, but water shows a certain mobility, and so does air. But water is the motion of Earth, while air is in many ways a motion of fire in a sublimated form, in the way that the motion of Earth becomes water, it becomes quickened into mobility by actually fire applied to Earth, making it water, while a quickening of fire leads to electromagnetic flow, which is air, which is different than physical stuff in the air. So that's a different matter. But those four elements coalesce in a certain way to create minerals, and then that's where we really start our formal understanding of physical dimensional life with the minerals. So we can think of minerals as first density, which Ra talked about as having some kind of pure sentience without self-directed movement. Minerals don't get up and walk around, and they don't have the same kind of striving or motion to the sun as the plants do. So the mineral kingdom being in first density uh, doesn't even have the kind of consciousness that a plant would have, but it has some kind of sentience which is elemental, associated with those qualities of earth, water, air, fire, or fire, air. And I think some people wonder about the sequence. In general, I would say that it's earth, water, fire, air, in the same way that the first four chakras are associated with earth, root chakra, water, second chakra, fire, third chakra, air, fourth chakra. And once you get beyond the three to the fourth, meaning first, second, third chakra, then through the diaphragm to the heart chakra, which would go, again, earth, water, fire, into air, there's a sublimation. And so, like, fourth dimension is on the other side, basically is unveiled, but actually, third density non-physical is also unveiled, meaning there's no veil in mind, and um, it represents the beginning of time, space, or has a far greater potential and availability of all consciousness or awareness of our total being when we get out of the physical, and that begins with the astral, but that's still third density. So you can say there's a interplay between the two lower, which would be earth and water, and then the two higher, which would be fire and air. In a certain sense, there's also an understanding that it's one, two, three, and then the fourth stands apart, air, in the same way that fourth chakra and above are qualitatively different than first, second, and third. So, minerals have a basic elemental sentience, but they don't have um, the same kind of consciousness. They wouldn't be considered to have consciousness, although they have some kind of sentient vibratory sensitivity. And again, I'm not clear about all this. I haven't, I'm not an expert on the densities, but the first dimension of what we would call sentient consciousness, which is some quality of self and other, or some quality of of a self-oriented identity, is second density, and that's where we get plants and animals. And the plants and animals themselves don't quite have they don't have self-consciousness, but their quality of consciousness lends itself more readily to the experience of a selfhood. And that's how plants and animals become a human. So the plant and the animal can also be seen as a lower and a higher, or an outer and an inner, but they're very similar. Uh, so the plants and the animals both are potentially harvestable into third density by some kind of investment of self or a gradual development of selfhood. Uh, Now, when you get into third density, this is the human world, and again, the experience of a bifurcation, or an outer and an inner, or a space-time experience and a time-space experience. Uh, as I said, space-time is what Ra is the term Ra uses to understand the physical third density experience. Time-space relates to the non-physical or astral plane. In many ways, that's the paradigm of sort of incarnation versus pre and post incarnation uh, that prevails in third, fourth, fifth, and sixth density. And again, space-time indicates some kind of experience of fixity in time and freedom in space, which is not very profound. So the emphasis is on bodily experience, on bodily identity, or body relations, object to object, movement through space, and the separation that appears, we experience between objects, and particularly self and other. In time-space, the emphasis is on time, and so like a person in meditation, there's fixity or non-mobility in space, but a greater freedom in time, which means an emphasis on mind, which allows the person before birth and after death to have the bigger overview, the greater overview of multiple incarnations, which is akin to soul awareness. Although I wouldn't say that the soul is in third density, astral plane or something. It's higher than that, but the sense of identity that goes beyond a single incarnation is normal in the astral plane in the higher levels when there's clarity. And so the higher levels of the third density plane are very much like 4, 5, 6, 7. So every dimension can be understood as having 7 subplanes, and so that notion of infinite subdensities or subdimensions is also a feature of each of the dimensions. So in the second density, it doesn't really come into play much because the plant and the animal, only at the higher levels of plants and animals like great trees and certain higher matured animals like dogs and cats, or elephants and horses, or whales and dolphins, or gorillas. Some, I don't. I'm not expert on all that, but some of those more advanced animals uh, would experience more of a sense of selfhood on the astral after they die than a natural dissolution. When a fox in the woods dies, it doesn't have anything near a kind of self-oriented experience on the astral like we do. But when a great tree dies, or an old gorilla, it may well have some kind of early um, sense of a greater sense of self after death, although it's still quite blended with a group soul. So in third density, again, you can say that the physical level, space-time, is associated to first, second, third chakra, and the non-physical dimension of astral plane is associated with fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh higher subplanes of third density, which are not visible. In fourth density and fifth, it's both pretty much the same, except uh, there's no veil in the physical or non-physical portions of those densities. And as the being develops in fifth density, there's a greater influence of kind of the spiritualization of experience, where everything is starting to be recognized as light, or love light, or energy, and it's understood that reality is fashioned by mind, not objective material energy form, material and or energy forms. that all is the one self, or this mind is the means of knowing unity, rather than some sense that there's a me and an environment, but that the environment is a projection of mind. And then there starts to be a greater dissolution of self-oriented identity, and body starts to fall away as a factor. So in sixth density, that scheme of outer inner, or incarnation and out of incarnation, starts to fall away, or totally falls away, and there's less of a sense of self. It's basically an awareness of the unified self, rather than the self as mind, or self as group love, or infinite love of fourth density. There's the sense that all is a unified field of light, and there's no other identity possible for mind other than that. And then ultimately there's the dissolution of the unified self, and that goes to seventh density, and there's nothing really to say about that, because it's in the swoon of becoming infinity, or knowing that there's only infinity, or the source of love light. The source of light is understood as one's being, and that's the octave, or the logos.
Oh, thanks, thanks. I have more questions bouncing to bouncing to come now. Um, but first, I would like just to come back to what you said about consciousness for first and second density. I mean, can we talk about consciousness for first and second density, or would it start at third density?
Well, what is consciousness, right? So we've talked about
Yeah.
that before. I mean, we're trying to use words, and again, I'm not, I'm not Gautama or Nityananda, so I can't really talk about the nature of things that I haven't penetrated as empty.
Mm-hmm.
So my sense is that if we think about our mineral versus plants and animals, the mineral has a kind of basic sensitivity to the environment. Uh, it may not be, it's certainly not a sense of self, and it wouldn't be any kind of an identity at all. But meaning, I don't think that uh, the mineral the mineral has a mind, like we talked about in the raw session, where rock could communicate with the infinite intelligence or the higher bodies of rock, and ask it to split and move, and that made the Giza pyramid. But the sense of consciousness of a rock would be fundamentally different than that of a plant or animal, and that of a plant or animal would be fundamentally different than a human. So mm, while we say that a human has self-consciousness and plants and animals have basic consciousness, which is a striving, the plant and the animal has a certain kind of identity that's associated with group membership. So uh, plants, most plants grow together. So you have a field of grass or trees. Uh, I would imagine that the, the consciousness, the each grass in the each blade of grass in the field doesn't have a separate awareness, but the field as a whole has some kind of sentience as a unified field of grass. However, that's less than a stand of trees, and within the stand of trees, meaning a group forest, uh, there would be some trees that are older, and somehow uh, the oldest trees, or the older trees, some of them, would be developing some kind of a personalized identity in association with its body, the fact that it's an old body, while the grass comes and goes. Trees that live for 500 years uh, have some kind of coalescing consciousness associated with body identification, without a sense of self. that's moving into a sense of self or a sense of identity with the physical, uh, and that can potentially lead to harvestability. So that's a kind of striving, or the result of striving. Like the tree goes to the sun and the grass, and they follow. The roots go down to the earth with the water, and the leaves and the branches go up to the sun. That kind of dual striving, down and up, is comparable to the animals, which seek each other for reproduction or shelter, for cooperation or play. Birds can play in the sky together. Mm, that that is an advancement because they have physical mobility that plants don't have. Uh, that is an extension. That in a way also could be understood as the application of fire and air to earth and water. The earth and water, excuse me, the emphasis of plants being fixed in space, being fixed in the earth, in their rooted position, is dominance of earth and water, and they rest in earth and depend on water, but they're striving towards the sun uh, in the sky, so they're influenced then by fire and air. That, in an evolutionary way, ultimately leads to animals. And animals are not fixed on Earth, except for some, I guess, some guys who just sit in the mud. But generally, the animal is mobile, and that represents some, aspect of freedom from the fixity in earth and water, and the result of interaction with fire and air. And the animal has some needs associated with community that the plant has, but doesn't act upon other than, doesn't act upon by mobility. The plant just stands there and the animals move around. That's a big difference, actually. And so, likewise, the human consciousness, which is considered self-consciousness, the sense of self, begins with body identification, like the field of grass, that then evolves to a 500-year-old tree, which, because of the age, or a 90-year-old monkey, gorilla, or a great turtle, a 100-year-old Galapagos turtle, the longevity of the body gives its own natural sentience, the natural um, sensitivity of the energetics of the form of the body, and its program, right? Every animal has instinct. Mm, that instinctuality is mind, is an aspect of mind. And so instinctuality as mind, early mind, in second density, um, being in the same body for a long, long time for a plant, would lead it to a greater sense of identification with that body and selfhood, or approaching selfhood. For animals, there's already a distinct body, and they have mobility in space, so they can move around. So it's much easier to eventually at least self-invest or self-develop some sense of selfhood, some sense of personal identity in association with the identity with the body, and then, of course, the tribe, or the herd, the flock of geese, and the school of fish, and the community of those similar animals. When you have the higher certain pets, dogs and cats, they're quite solitary in that they don't really have great community with other cats and dogs, but they have more community or interaction with human. And from that, there's a quickening of that development of selfhood, or personal identity, in association not only with body identity, but also the communication between the person and that pet. So I would say that there is a germinal, there are the roots of consciousness in first density, which is a basic elemental sensitivity of the minerals, and that develops into a little ripened condition of consciousness, we could say consciousness properly, starting in second density, which is comparable also to the notion that we don't we don't have to do a certain kind of work. There may be blockage in first chakra for the human, but the nature of the work on the first chakra is really accessed by second, in my understanding. There's been some discussion about that, but in my view, there's a fundamental difference between the working of second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth chakras and working on one and seven. And so I often consider first as before consciousness and seventh as after consciousness. In seventh, we call it awareness, and because there's no subject-object issue. There's neither dualistic consciousness of me and you, which is what we have basically beginning in the human, and in the sixth density it goes to the unified self, but there's still a sense of self. Self as one versus then self as separate. In seventh density, which I would say is beyond or after consciousness, using the term awareness, it's non-identified, non-identificatory, non-identifying awareness, or consciousness without any kind of identification or identity. Likewise, in first density, like first chakra, it's not really it's not really yet within the sphere of what we consider ourself uh, in terms of thinking. So the deepest blockages of a person are normally in second. I mean, again, there's first chakra blockage, but the normal working on chakra blockages really by mind can be done only through the second, and the higher work on the advanced work on first chakra is actually done with the advanced work on seventh chakra. That's a very subtle kind of thing. But the roots of consciousness then are in first density, and it's a kind of very elemental awareness or sensitivity, and then formal consciousness begins with some kind of body identification in second density, starting from, like little algae, single-celled organisms, uh, plant-type things that go up all the way through the harvestable, old trees and certain animals. That consciousness then morphs into self-consciousness in third density, where there's a full-fledged body identification and sense of I am this body and I am not you. And that's not quite true, but it's a step above the plants and animals, and a much greater development of mind. So, so that's how we'd have to talk about it, I think.
Yes, yes, thanks. Um, since you brought the subject of ours, what do you think is the requirement to harvest for each density? Like the requirement to move from first to second density, and the requirement to move to third density, the requirement to move from fourth density, is it developing wisdom, and so on. So if it's possible, can you give us some example, like the harvest of a dog or a cat, for each density, if you have that in mind?
Okay.
That's a long question.
Right.
Sorry.
Right. I mean, yeah, these are basically like, final exam metaphysics for graduating third density fellows. If you want to get out of third density, answer these metaphysics and then you'll be qualified. So,
Yeah, just some themes,
yeah, the basic
Yes,
highlights. Well,
thanks.
in some way, I mean, again, these are really deep questions as well as being, long answers, and my understanding is limited. In general, uh, harvestability or the capacity for graduation of a being from one dimension to another represents some greater capacity to utilize intelligent infinity or intelligent energy, which means some greater aspect of access to infinite power. Infinite power being infinite, um, is then applied within the mind-body-spirit complex or within the being at each dimensional level in a different way. So for the grass to become a great tree, or for the fox to become a domestic cat, and the cat is harvestable, or the great tree is harvestable, represents those beings of second density, right, plants and animals, being able to make use of a greater degree of intelligent infinity or basic love light or light uh, as associated with the lessons of that density. So the lessons of second density is basically the development of a stable self consciousness, mm, that there is some kind of sufficient um, focalizing of sensitivity or sentience or awareness or consciousness. It's a specific degree of focusing of consciousness into some kind of a personal identity. And it's probably not a heck of a lot different from great trees uh, to harvestable cats, dogs, and gorillas, meaning all of them, because they're harvestable to third, if they are, would have a similar formation in mind. It's really a development in mind because the bodies are different. You know, a tree versus a cat. The body is not the key. The key is the development of energy quality in mind or qualities of mind. And the development of some kind of sufficient sense of selfhood, which is some kind of a self-reflective or a distinction in mind between the again between identity and environment, um, and knowing or being aware of some distinction between a self identity and the so-called external environment. Now, again, in sixth density, with the sense of a unified self, or the awareness that all is one, and that's the self, that totality, that wholeness, uh, the distinction between inner and outer falls away, and the distinction between internal personal identity and external objective environment falls away. Uh, it's hard to explain that, but there's no personal willingness, or that's why the law of free will is considered the first distortion of the law of one. Uh, our experience of a personal free will, which is essential to the path, is also an illusion or a distortion in a limited perception of from the perspective of unity or a unified self. That too, a unified self, is also a limited uh, perception or a temporary identity based on a limited perception uh, as the counterpoint to self versus other, the dualistic consciousness, which is the non-unified self. So before so sixth density has the unified self, third, fourth, and fifth dimension pretty much has a dualistic self or non-unified self or a sense of self as different than the environment. Second density, harvestable, would basically have the the necessary degree of a sense of distinction between an experiencer and the environment. And because great trees live a long time, and because of the much activity in interaction between pets and human, in the case of dogs and cats, for example, uh, that's a quickening of mind which allows a greater activation of its higher body. It's a third density body. So the harvestability can also be understood as the activation of the next higher body of that entity. So minerals have seven bodies, seven energy fields. Body equals energy field. So the mineral, plant, animal, human, and fourth, fifth, sixth dimensional, and seven have some kind of have a seven-dimensional structure themselves. It's the hierarchical nature of being. And so the hierarchical nature of being equals seven energy fields associated with seven chakras, like the seven colors, associated with different levels. And so the plant and the animal would have to have sufficient activation of their third dimensional body for harvest. Likewise, the human would have to have sufficient development of the fourth dimensional body for harvest, and the fourth and fifth dimensional beings themselves would have to have activation of the next higher body to graduate, of course. And, we understand that the human level is associated with choice of path, or the fundamental decision for the direction of will, and self-chosen development with love or without. Interestingly, of course, those on the negative path can graduate to 4D negative without heart chakra development. First, second, third, fourth chakras are quite blocked, but they're developing the capacity to have fourth dimensional body activated, even though it's without fourth chakra. How that's done, I'm not really sure, but it's applied through the development of fifth and sixth chakra without love. But each harvestability is basically sufficient sufficient increased vibration of the next higher energy body, generally, or some kind of activation of the next higher energy body to allow graduation. And so the harvest of a dog or a cat basically, again, means that they're activating, or a great tree, they're activating their third dimensional body associated with the human state or the condition of self-consciousness. And so then they can be reborn into the human.
Oh, I have a question just that comes like, do you think that actually the harvest could be linked to what you say when you say the increase of power and energy? Can it be the evolution of a sense of self that becomes kind of greater and greater until there's a separation with the polarization in third density, and then kind of expansion of the sense of self until there's dissolution?
You can say that. I mean, the grass in the field has less of a sense of self-identity than the great tree, and the fox in the woods has much less sense of selfhood than the cat, in one's lap. Uh, and the human has a greater sense of self than the plants or animals, and higher dimensional beings have a greater sense of self than human. And higher self, Atman, has a more expanded awareness of its beingness. It's the dimension of true being, which we correlate to self, but it's a unified self, or unity as one's being as all, and then seventh density dissolves that. So you can say that the activation of the successively higher bodies, energy fields associated with higher chakras, is a progressively expanding sense of self, uh, where the sense of what one can perceive expands, or the range of perception expands progressively, or by quantum leaps with each activation of each successively higher body, which goes to harvestability, until until then there's at last no distinction between inner and outer in that continually expanding sense of or capacity of perception. So as
Yeah, no limit, no structure.
um, well, yeah, I mean it's approaching infinity. I would say that there's structure but no limit. The structure is whatever chakra that has been developed. I mean, up to seventh, you know, I mean, I can't really say what seventh density is, but it's, you know, it's a dissolved, unified self and boundless awareness. That's a dissolution for sure. Mm, as to how it's structured, it's just aware of the natural laws of light and the there can be a tapestry of infinite light, or there can be a field of infinite light, like the ocean as a field of vast water. Uh, Within that, however, can be discerned currents and flows from top to bottom and left to right and here to there, and waves and morphs and patterns and laws. That's a structure. That's a structure of light, but it's totally fluid and ever-changing. But again, when you get to sixth and seventh density, all of this is quite different because there really is no longer um, the same kind of experience of distinct objects or linear time. So there's definitely a dissolution with the expanded perception, which is the activation of higher bodies, but I would think that it would reveal the intrinsic structure of light, of seven-dimensional light.
So to go back to the harvest of first, second, and third density, I was thinking about can this harvest be done also with the help of humans? I mean, for animals. I recall you once said that animals could develop a sense of self through reception of love from human investment. So how does that work? Are humans playing a role in the harvest of first, second densities, do you think?
Um, well, Ra talked about the investment of love and care between human to animal as being assistance to the animal in its development of self-consciousness or activation of the third chakra body, and therefore harvestability into the human realm, third density. So yes, of course, humans that interact closely with animals can be doing that. As to how humans do that with plants, uh, when there's a sense of a sacred tree and there's some kind of worship or sanctity recognized by many people with a certain place, particularly trees, that would be also the same kind of investment, and so that tree could harvest. I don't know how a place would harvest, but uh, the plant, the elder plants in that area might benefit from it. So yes, for sure, humans play a role in helping animals, and sometimes a plant or a tree, in development of its third chakra body, its selfhood, for sure.
So, in the same logic, I mean, what happens then if people only give anger or hatred to plants and animals? Do you think it would help them to harvest,
Well,
or it will decrease their energy in some way?
um, yeah, well, when we're talking about energy, we're talking about activation of the third chakra body. Okay, that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a simple way of looking at it. So, Earth ascension now, dimensional shift, is the planetary logos or the planetary being activating its own fourth dimensional body, therefore being suitable to host first, second, third, and fourth dimensional life, which would be the kingdom of heaven on earth or the new age. Now, uh, the energetics of a plant or animal that receives lots of hatred from a human, I would imagine, would be comparable to receiving love. Uh, it would be disharmonious, and because of the disharmony, there would be some perhaps breakdown of some kind of uh, stable energetic development because of the destructive or deconstructive effects of anger and hatred. Anger, hatred is deconstructive. It destructs or uh, tears down or breaks up any kind of energy, a stable new energy formation. You know, that's how you break down a person, right? You break their mind by focused hatred. People do that. That's mind control or abusive friendship or abusive parenting, which can have very, that's how you form, uh, psychotic mind or schizophrenia from children, in children by terrible parents or by mind control. Uh, I would imagine there's some greater development of a selfhood for a plant or an animal. It's a strange question, there's some greater development of selfhood in the plant or animal that receives hatred from a human, comparable to the plant or animal getting a lot of love. But because of the destructive effects of anger, and that it's kind of tearing down effect, it would be more limited than receiving love.
Yeah,
But it is true that um, the plant or animal that receives some pain or limitation, like the tree that has to grow in a box, or the tree that um, has some kind of environmental influence that constricts its growth or twists it in some way, or kind of limits or deleteriously affects it, but it will continue growing. Likewise, anger, hatred from the human to the animal, uh, and physical pain of the animal, is also associated with a greater sense of self-identity. And it's actually said in some sources that some of the early, I think, Alice Bailey material, for whatever it's worth, talked about how in Lemurian times, early humanity, the beginning of the 75,000-year cycle, a long time ago, some of the practices that were done by them, some of their spiritual practices, and some of the means by which they developed a greater sense of selfhood or development of mind in the early third density condition were physical pain, included physical pain. And if you look at Native American sundancing, where they spear the flesh of their breast and then dance around a pole, um, that's obviously quite painful. But that was a spiritual practice, and that's Lemurian. And because of the less sensitive, the lower degree of sensitivity associated with early third development, third dimensional mind. Early 3D mind is different than late 3D mind, less sensitive, more body identified, less mentally developed, or less mental selfhood, more of a physical identity selfhood. So to move from I am body to I am body mind, uh, some of the early practices involve physical pain or physical trial that uh, that later practices didn't require. Sitting in vipassana, watching your breath is not too painful physically, except your knees may hurt. But while sun dancing or some kind of practices like that, could be very painful. But Lemurian body was different than later third density body. So there is some value uh, to physical pain or physical disharmony for a less mentally developed self-conscious being, or to a plant or an animal that doesn't have a full self-consciousness, may still develop a greater degree of personal identity by the application of negativity, hatred, or physical pain, but it may be limited in how much it can allow the coalescence of a stable sense of self and therefore harvestability to third density.
well, we're getting close to the first hour, but so I would have maybe a last question. It's since you talk about this development of mind versus body when maybe we were more body related at first. I was thinking, can we view the densities like the evolution from body to mind to spirit?
Absolutely. Yeah. You see, I mean, you can divide the seven chakras in many ways, and you can divide the seven densities in many ways also. We understand that we can, once there's the development of a self-consciousness in the human level, third density, we can also divide each density into two, outer and inner, or the incarnate physical, physicalized incarnative phase, and the non-physical or uh, more more simply energetic pre and post incarnational phase, right? So space-time physical and time-space non-physical, like in the physical world, in the human third density, also in 4, also in 5, and also early 6. That's not quite the case in first, second, or seventh, or first, second, and later 6 and 7. And so you can divide the dimensions uh, in a way of with self-consciousness or not with self-consciousness. And so then you would have, you can do it many ways. One is there's first density, which is in some ways pre-consciousness. The minerals don't have the same, um, don't even have a germinal identity. Germinal meaning elemental. They have an elemental identity, which is basically not even a physical, not even identified with their physical form. Before before even the beginning of identity with a body, the minerals have. That's comparable to the seventh density entity, who really is in infinity, and a dualistic self and a unified self are long gone, meaning there's no more consciousness. So first density and seventh density are similar, and then you can say that those are in the octave, those are body, the levels of body and spirit. So first density, if you want to divide the seven dimensions into body, mind, spirit, you can say that first density is body, and second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth is mind, and seven is spirit, pre-consciousness and post-consciousness. You can also say that first and second have a pair, while 6 and 7 have a pair, are paired. And so first density and second density would be body, and 6 and 7 are spirit. So first, second is body, 3, 4, 5 is mind, or two, I'm sorry, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 3, 4, 5 is mind, and 6 and 7 is spirit. But you can see that second and 6, which is another chakra band, right? The chakra bands are 1, 7, 2, 6, 3, 5. The chakra banding of 2 and 6 share qualities with 1 and 7. So you couldn't quite say that second density is beyond, is with outside of mind, because in the human experience, second and third are very paired, while fourth and fifth are paired, and 6 and 7 stand alone or stand together. So you can say that all 7 dimensions have 7 subplanes, and the first, second, and third subplanes are associated with body, and 4, 5, or 4, 5, 6 with mind, and 6, 7 with spirit. There are many ways of cutting it, So you can say that 1 and 2 are together, and then 3, 4, 5 is mind, 6 and 7 is spirit. You can say that 1 is body, first density is like body, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is mind, and 7 is spirit. But each dimension has 7 levels. So within each dimension, there are gradated energy fields, and qualities of body, mind, and spirit are interplaying in all of them. So, but there is an evolution of the octave, and it's not as rigid as, some dimensions are only body, and others are mind, and others are spirit. But yes, sure, sixth and seventh density are comparable to spirit complex, like in the head for the human, and the foundational dimension is really first, and the dimensions where there's greater mind are certainly 2, 3, 4, and 5. So there is that kind of division possible.
Thanks. That's a very nice picture to to see because in a way the evolution of the universe is the evolution of inside a body. It's just the same. Where from
Well,
the micro to the macro, it's the same.
yeah, it's not within a body, but it's in a body, it's in a being. The evolution of a being and the evolution of the octave are comparable, right? Not the evolution of a body, but the evolution of a human being, let's say, is the microcosm. And that's seven-dimensional, which can be divided into three. And that, the seven came out of the three. So, like when the white light goes through the prism, or how does white light, which is a one, become a rainbow, which is a seven? Well, it's mediated by a three, which is the prism, which are the three laws: the law of free will, the law of love, law of light, or the qualities, those qualities of will, mind, and vibration, or light energy. So